Live, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Weather Center Live for our tropical update, our evening tropics talk, as some of you from last hurricane season are very familiar with. I've been doing some adjustments here in the Weather Center to get things a little bit more comfortable and kosher in between this tropical hiatus, if you will. So if you notice, my mic has gone from over here to over here, and now it's coming in from over here. So hopefully this is where we are going to stay, at least for a decent amount of time, and I'll try not to talk too loud as well because I know I'm right into the microphone. This thing's going to be picking me up loud and clear, and so I also wanted to do this to try to preserve my voice a little bit as we go through these upcoming tropics talks. And to tell you the truth, right out of the gate, whether you're tuning in live, good evening if you are tuning in live. It is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, July 10th, 2024. Already been 6 days since our 4th of July holiday. I can't believe we're already looking at a week since that holiday. I feel like I was just wishing everyone a happy 4th of July maybe yesterday or the day before yesterday. We don't have too much to discuss tonight, I'll tell you the truth. We don't have a heck of a lot to go over tonight. We're going to talk more or less what's on the horizon for the back end of the hurricane season. Right now, we still have two players on the board, one being post-tropical cyclone Beryl. We are still more or less analyzing this feature because of the fact that it is creating some pretty intense weather activity in unfamiliarized territory. Usually, this type of activity we're seeing associated with the remnants of Beryl, this is as non-tropical as you could get, and I'll show you Weather Prediction Center's analysis here in a moment. But Beryl is still doing its thing. It's a remnant low pressure with fronts and jet support attached to its low central pressure, and as a result, we're seeing widespread tornadic activity for portions of the Midwest, lower Great Lakes area, and particularly spanning up into the Northeast, where our warm sector and an occluded front is beginning to build along its east-southeast flank. I'll show you that here in a moment. This guy right here, I'm truthfully a little kind of meh that we have this on the game board. I'm really confused as to why we stamped this disturbance, if you can even call it a disturbance. It's given a 10% chance out of the next 48 hours, a 10% chance over the next 7 days, and I think even that is being a bit generous with this system. And I'll show you it on the satellite. We'll take a close look at the satellite image, and you know, I guess I can go and buy some of the justification for why we are highlighting this. Typically, for a lot of you tropical enthusiasts who've been following hurricane season after hurricane season after hurricane season, you usually, climatologically speaking, see most of our development down here or down here. And they tend to track off in this sort of direction 9 out of 10 times almost, it seems like. They kind of do this, is what your climatological average for the months of June and July look like. The MDR is fairly quiet. We had Beryl and Invest 96L that came and caused a lot of ruckus. Beryl was our first long track system of the hurricane season, doing something more along the lines of this and tracking all the way through. So that's going to be a lovely piece of spaghetti on our after action report for the end of this hurricane season. But anyways, to give you guys the meat and potatoes of what this little thing is going to be doing, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. It is going to be a rainmaker. It's going to be a heavy rainmaker for areas that do need it, especially in the wake of the high pressure ridge that had been keeping us safe from Hurricane Beryl as it came up out of the south and west area of the Caribbean. So some positive, we've definitely been getting a lot of rainfall here in Florida. It's been lovely, to tell you the truth. Thunderstorms almost on a daily basis now for the last 3 or 4 days, I would say. But I wouldn't get too excited about this. I wouldn't even consider it an area to watch, to tell you the truth. And I've been seeing some other sources mentioning this is something we need to keep our eyes on. I really don't think so. I don't give it a big vote of confidence. The dynamics are not there. It is a, quote, homegrown low pressure off the tail end of a frontal system. So, I mean, it has that going for it. But in terms of overall environmental characteristics conducive of traditional tropical development, JNSI, I'm just not seeing it. So here is WPC's latest surface analysis. These are going to be the remnants of Beryl right up in through here. You can see a double barrel low solution, one that's parked over one of the southern Great Lakes just off the southeast tip of the Michigan Peninsula, and then another area of low pressure, more or less a stable wave, if not a triple point low, that's beginning to develop over New York State, and this is where we are seeing a ton of our severe weather activity. There's been a lot of tornadic activity associated with this system. We have remnant tropical energy energy and vorticity still butched up inside this low pressure, and as a result, as this took on frontal characteristics, you can see a chain of cold fronts attached to it, indicative that it has been picked up by the trough that initially brought Beryl on shore over southeast Texas, and as a result, now we have a very familiar weather system moving through, very similar to what we saw during the likes of April, May, and the beginning of June with our severe weather outbreaks that continue to occur on a regular basis for the Midwest, Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, through Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and now up into the Northeast. They're feeling a little bit of the effects of Beryl. And you can see with that southern extent of the front coming down, this is what could possibly try to spin up a very brief low pressure area down off the southeast coast. I wouldn't be too alarmed about it. I wouldn't give it I wouldn't even give it the welcome wagon, to tell you the truth. We're not going to get much out of it. A little astonished that we designated this as a matter of fact altogether. Here is a look at the general game board. So this is what we have going on across the tropics as of right now. And as we've been mentioning for the longest time, it is very quiet. Very quiet. If you look, there's nothing out there. We have tremendous amounts of dust all across this area, and that's why we have nothing but cooked tropical waves out here that really aren't doing much of anything. They really don't have much thunderstorm activity or convection, as we like to say, associated with them. Another robust tropical wave getting ready to plop its way off of Africa, but I wouldn't pay it any attention. As soon as it comes off and begins to move towards the south and southwest of our Cabo Verde Islands, they're going to get washed out thanks to the extensive amount of dry, dusty air that's out there. It's been influencing our weather down here in the southeast, across the Greater Antilles, the Bahamas, areas of Central America, and up into Texas, Louisiana. Beryl more or less just kind of pulled that long string of dust, and that's what also encroached on Invest 96L, prevented that upstream system from developing and becoming our next named system, Debbie. Debbie is indeed the next one on the list, the next name on the list, and Debbie does not look to be on the immediate horizon whatsoever. We are very quiet. We're getting diurnal or daytime thunderstorms firing over the likes of Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, Jamaica, seeing some daytime orographic or mechanically lifted thunderstorms occurring over the terrain out there. Same with Central America. Central America is battling the monsoonal trough in the Pacific, bringing back widespread thunderstorm coverage from the likes of Panama, Costa Rica, all the way up to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Belize. If I still have any of my viewers down there tuning in. Same thing with the Yucatan. It looks like we're getting a little bit of thunderstorm activity trying to flare up on the eastern half of the Yucatan, the southeastern half of the peninsula, I should say, before actually crossing the border into the Belize. But all in all, we are very quiet. There's Beryl, what's left of it. You can see that there really isn't anything associated with Beryl itself anymore. Parked up there over Michigan, the Great Lakes, the Ohio, Mississippi, well, not the Mississippi Valley, but the Ohio Valley and the lower Midwest states. This is going to be your frontal warm sector. You can see where a lot of the copious thunderstorms that have been producing severe weather and actual touchdown tornadoes across the Northeast, particularly in New York State, parts of Pennsylvania, and will be continuing to go up towards the Northeast. But we're going to lose the influence of that here very soon. We shouldn't have to do battle with severe thunderstorms until, or I should say, after about another 24-ish hours of it marinating up there. Here's a closer look. I don't know what happened to College of DuPage. There we go. Here's a closer look at our, quote, disturbance down there off of the southeast. So if you look here, I can't really see anything, to tell you the truth. That's why I'm a little perplexed, confused, and discombobulated as to why we have a disturbance highlighted down here. I guess to kind of try to keep the tropics open. I noticed in the chat earlier today that there were a few folks mentioning that the tropics are not necessarily closed down because of the fact that we have a yellow blip on the radar. I beg to differ. We don't have any immediate development expected. We don't have any real gratuitous development expected at all. So if that's the case, I would go ahead and wipe the slate clean and say we are quiet. We have dry air coming in the backside of the system on the east side. You can see where all of our easterly shear in the mid to upper levels is pushing all this moisture over Florida. It's very good for us. Very good for a lot of us here in Florida that need the extra rainfall next the southern extent of the Florida Peninsula because of the fact that we haven't gotten rid of all that excess soil moisture and the flooding that we saw back in the likes of 90L, I want to say coming up on just under a month ago. The time has been blurring together and flying by. We had 90L that wandered through and dumped copious amounts of rainfall, flooded out the southern one-third of the Florida Peninsula, but everybody else is actually benefiting from this. I personally am benefiting from this extraordinarily. I'm glad that we're getting this moisture fetch of whatever you want to call this, a disturbance, an area of interest. Supposedly, there is going to be a reconnaissance aircraft going into this. At least I think I saw on social media that we're expecting recon to go into this thingamajiggy is the best way I would like to describe it. But I don't know what they're intending on finding. I don't know what they think they're going to find, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. We just don't have the dynamics. We have a trough and dry air pushing in from the west. We have dry air and an upper low beginning to push in from the east. That's our upper low right there, as a matter of fact, on the right-hand side of the screen here, and that's what's helping to really shear this apart. So I can't even really see a very consolidated area of low pressure, maybe some vorticity in the mid to low levels that just gets stretched out like this and kind of tries to spin up a low-level circulation, but nothing tropical. I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 36 to 48 hours, National Hurricane Center drops it. And truthfully, that's all we've got for the tropics as of right now. So we're going to go ahead and fasten our seatbelts and start talking long-term. So this is a look at cyclonic weather. We're looking obviously over the continent of Africa, and this is what we want to pay attention to and what we're going to be paying attention to as we get towards the end of this month and especially into August. There's a couple of different things I want you to notice on here, okay, and I'll walk you through them. First and foremost, before we even look down at the African easterly jet here, because obviously we still have a tremendous amount of activity out there, tropical equatorial activity, but I want us to look up over the south, or not the south, but the northwest corner of Africa. This is what's really helping to produce a ton of our dry, dusty air that's being pushed out across the Atlantic, shutting us down for all intents and purposes right now. If you look very closely in the satellite imagery, once the daytime heating goes away, you can see an upper-level anticyclone spinning right here. I'll draw it for you guys. And if you notice, in terms of where the sun angle and the sun hits the surface of Africa the most, it is in the northwest quadrant. So we are currently in what's called a westerly phase of our Saharan heat low. The Saharan heat low is firing on all cylinders big time, and that's why we have so much dust out there across the entirety of the tropical Atlantic basin, because when you can see the reflection of our Saharan heat low high up into the atmosphere, to where your anticyclone here is spinning over the northwest quadrant of Africa, that goes to show you that we are locked down. We are locked down. There's not going to be very much of anything going on in the immediate future for the tropics. All these rather good-looking waves are not going to be able to do anything. Now, with that being said, let's move on to the right-hand side of the screen. So what we're looking at here is going to be the Indian Ocean, at least I should say the western periphery of the Indian Ocean. And the reason I bring this up is the more monsoonal activity we get out over the Indian Ocean, the greater chances we will see increased enhancement. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but essentially just stronger mesoscale convective systems, which will then turn into our tropical waves as they move across Central and West Africa. As you can see, all that moisture firing from the Indian Ocean monsoon is transferring over the southern Middle East. This is the boot of Saudi Arabia, where I was deployed at one point in time. Kuwait, Afghanistan off to the corner here, Iraq, Iran up in towards here, the boot of Saudi Arabia, and then getting up towards Israel, Lebanon, and so on and so forth, but that's neither here nor there. What we want to pay attention to is how robust of an Indian Ocean monsoon we end up gathering and how much it persists through August and September especially. Maybe not so much right now, but August and September for sure, because that's going to influence our overall easterly jet activity. As you can see, it's already doing a wonderful job of doing so. It's just a shame we have our Saharan heat low in its western phase kicking out just gratuitous and wave after wave after wave. I'm going to stop saying that G word. We just have a large amount of dust being pushed out over the Atlantic, and that's going to suffocate them. It's going to asphyxiate them, kind of like what the dust is doing to us here in the mainland U.S. and across the Caribbean, making our air quality very poor. It's increasing the aerosol count in the atmosphere, so we're also losing a lot of that convective instability that just simple daytime heating can do over the ocean. That's also why our anomalies had gone down for a little while. They're already starting to rebound as the dust kind of ebbs and flows. And then obviously, last but not least, the glaring elephant in the room are these very, very active tropical wave features that are moving across Africa. This is going to likely be the song and dance all the way across the rest of this month into September, I should say into August, into September, and then potentially October. So we want to watch these two areas, the Indian Ocean monsoon, how much activity and how much rising motion we can get going out there, because that'll then correlate to what happens over East and Central Africa, and then that'll correlate to what kind of waves and what kind of vorticity we have wandering off of Africa, like this wave right in through here. Fairly healthy wave for sure coming off right now, and you can see some spin with it as well already. Problem is, because of all that dry, dusty air, it is increasing subsidence or sinking air in the atmosphere. We don't have anything to help our convection fire off, so this thing is going to die the moment it goes from here to right here. It's going to be game over. We're going to be left with remnant cloud cover. Now, I wanted to also bring your attention to this. So we had a new update from CSU, Phil Klotzbach, Dr. Phil Klotzbach. We had a new update from them over there at Colorado State University, and they've actually upped their numbers for their tropical cyclone outlook. As you guys know, if you've been following this channel for a long time, or if you're brand new, I'll reiterate another time and time again, I don't really care about the numbers, at least not right now. I don't care about the numbers, and we can rack and stack and hot wash the numbers once we get done with the hurricane season, but for now, I'm looking for threats and potential impactfulness. And the one key tidbit that I did some very basic mathematical calculations, and I'm going to propose this to you here in a second. I have my notebook just off to the left-hand side here. So we're in an Enso neutral right now. We're in an Enso neutral, and that's going to have implications on what our general steering pattern is. And I'm going to show you some of the currents and some of the water temp features out there and the oscillations that I've been paying close attention to that are also going to influence what the peak of the hurricane season looks like. But we have busted our La Nina forecast. We were creeping down into a more definitive cool neutral with a -1, or I should say -0.1 Enso value, OSI value, as you can see here on the chart, but we're slowly but surely starting to get another wave in the pattern and kink back up towards that neutral point. So this is a piece that we want to pay close attention to. Here is our, whoops, I lost it. There we go. This is our ocean heat content across the Atlantic. So if you guys thought that Beryl did a job, or Beryl weakened our ocean heat content, or did anything that's going to save us from the hurricane season, I've had other folks on other social media platforms mentioning we're still going to bust, nothing's going to happen. We have copious amounts of ocean heat content still ready to rock and roll, particularly in my area of concern that I'm going to continue watching from about 45 degrees west longitude to 75 degrees west longitude. This is going to be my hotspot, and it will remain my hotspot right there for cyclogenesis even into the central and western MDR, into the Lesser Antilles, and the East Central Caribbean MDR. So that's going to be the area that I'm particularly watching for, and you can see just how intense our ocean heat content is looking. If we come over to our current OISST, the Operational Coral Reef Watch version of our SST anomaly, this is the last 7 days. We have not seen any cooling whatsoever. There has not been any substantial upwelling. There has not been any substantial cooling or anything like that. And yeah, so we still have plenty of action out there. And what I want to draw your attention to is what's particularly happening off the coast of Spain, Portugal, and northwest Africa. This is going to be our Canary Current. The Canary Current is one of the new forecaster identifiers that CSU is looking at in determining what their July and then subsequent August and so on and so forth outlooks will look like as we go month to month. The problem with this is, and why I think on top of El Nino pushing everything off towards the east, the problem with this is we have our greatest concentration of hot water and hottest anomalies all the way up towards the mid-latitudes. which is going to definitely play a role on our North Atlantic oscillation. We're going to probably keep a stronger North Atlantic oscillation out there because of the fact that we have such great temperature contrast on either side. If you look down over the mid-latitudes just to the northwest of our Azore Islands here, Azores, we have a very big dome of abnormally warm water temps. But then just to the immediate north, as you get closer to where our Icelandic low would be, we have a rapid cooling of our water temps up there. So we have a very tight pressure, not pressure, excuse me, we do have a tight pressure gradient up there, but we have a really good temperature gradient that's inducing extreme levels of low pressure here and localized higher pressure up here, which is going to help to distort the North Atlantic oscillation. The Canary Current is also responsible for the NAO in terms of if we have cooler Canary Current waters flowing around like this through our North Atlantic gyre is what it's called, that also influences what the trade winds do, what our African easterly jet does, and so on and so forth in terms of our Atlantic tropical wave movement, if you guys are tracking what I'm explaining right now. It'll also play a role on our Bermuda Azores high. And if you guys remember, and if you don't, I'll show you right now, this is what we had last year. So notice we had very cool anomalies over much of the subtropics, and our hottest water was right there off the west coast of Africa, Spain, Portugal, parts of Europe, the UK. We had our Canary Current as the hottest point on the Atlantic. And as a result, that's why we had our subtropical high perched like so. I'm going to use a different color so I don't lose you guys with all the different lines I'm drawing. That's why our subtropical high was parked right up against the European and African continents. And all of our systems, I'm looking at you, Lee and Franklin and Nigel and all the folks who were hyping those storms up as Florida storms or East Coast storms. That's why all of them just did this the entire hurricane season. It will forever go down in infamy as the hype hurricane season. We had a Dahlia that managed to sneak in under the radar, and that was it. Everything else was out over the Atlantic. So now if you extrapolate this 1 year forward and you come back to where we are now, and you notice where our hot dome is, you can probably more or less identify that, okay, if we had our high pressure here last year, it's probably going to migrate just a little bit further off towards the west. And we've already been seeing it. We have a very dominant and robust subtropical high pressure that's been just engulfing a large majority of the Atlantic. And some of that has to also do with the fact that our Atlantic meridional mode is also firing with a large temperature gradient down here. You guys aren't going to be able to see it too well, but if you notice, we have extensive cool anomalies just off the chart as we get into the southern hemisphere, and then very warm anomalies into the north hemisphere equatorial tropical waters. So what that's doing is it's creating localized high pressure off the southwest quadrant of Africa and pushing all of our instability up towards the actual North Atlantic MDR. And with the combination of our high-pressure steering systems borrowing instability from the southern hemisphere, it's only a matter of time before our atmosphere clears up, our Saharan heat low goes to bed for the rest of the season, and we start to get these very robust easterly waves coming in. And unfortunately, I am still very determined to see future forecasts indicating that the Lesser Antilles, the Greater Antilles, the Bahamas, and the Mid-Atlantic are really going to have to pay attention come August. At this point, the signals are ringing the bells in my ear. My gut is basically screaming at me at this point. And I'm telling you, we're going to have to continue to watch in the Lesser Antilles. Our Greater Antilles are going to continue to see threats rolling through there. We're likely to see something try to make a run for us here in the state of Florida, the Southeast, and the Mid-Atlantic coast. I really do think, historically speaking, as that high pressure tries to retrograde a little bit towards the north, that's going to open up an avenue for these storms to stop crashing into Central America, the Yucatan, and Texas, and give them a little nudge off towards the right here. This is a look at our MJO. So the MJO is doing some silly things right now. When I say silly, it's kind of going into a very weakened phase. We're more or less losing the capabilities of tracking it optimally on our time phase diagram. I'll show you guys here in a little bit. But the general thinking still is that the Atlantic is likely to start to signal a reawakening, a resurgence as we get towards the end of this month. You can see this is July 25th, and all the way through to the bottom into August is when our MJO is really going to help to clear out a lot of the Saharan dust, a lot of that sinking motion that's already currently plaguing the greater Atlantic Ocean right now. Mix all that out and open it up for activity. You can see this is where I mentioned that it's kind of being a bit dorky. So we've seen that our break was supposed to start around the 11th and last until about the 26th of July. Now we have a giant negative anomaly here, or I should say a positive anomaly here, parked over the Lesser Antilles, the Caribbean Ocean, and parts of the subtropical Atlantic if you refer to our chart down here. But there's still some embedded areas of positive vorticity or rising motion in that general area. And regardless, the MJO is just one piece of the puzzle. If you look at this, we're watching for a huge increase in our Indian monsoon as well as our African standing wave. So no matter what the case may be, if our MJO is present or not, we're going to have very robust conditions. And truthfully, MJO aside, I feel like it's only a matter of time before things start to kick off, especially once our Saharan dust can get up out of the way. This is what I was talking about as well. If you look, this is going to be our time phase forecast for the MJO, and you can see we're actually in a fairly weakened state right now, and all of our ensembles are thinking as it rotates around the different segments, these would be the phases, phase 6, phase 7, then resetting back to 8, and then 1. Typically between phases 2 and 4 is where we are most optimal. You can make a case for 5 as well, but typically 2 through 4 is where we are most optimized in the tropical Atlantic main development region. And you can see we have a little bit of time before this thing spins back around in a very weakened phase of the MJO. So the MJO may not really give us a whole lot of effort. You can see the only model here is going to be our BOMM, our BOMM model is actually thinking we will go into a rather enhanced MJO as it circles back around, parks itself over Africa and the Indian Ocean, and that's going to help to ignite our weather pattern here in the tropics. Kind of the same general thinking, just a more weakened state with the MJO on another model, the BOMA. The EMOM, kind of thinking the same thing. The EMON, more or less the same thing, but then other models such as the ECMM, the ECMF, and before you guys start asking questions, I'm really not going to elaborate on the models because I'm just going to lose you guys. Just more or less, these are all the different internal computer models that Climate Prediction Center uses to forecast the phasing of the MJO. And a lot of these are going to be interpolated with our regular global models we use on a regular basis. For example, the ECMF is the Euro. So this is what the Euro is thinking our MJO is likely going to do as it rotates around the planet and oscillates back to its starting position and then begins the same cycle all over again. But we're looking at a fairly weak MJO. The further out those lines are like so, the further out they go from that center point would indicate stronger either downward or upward forcing depending on what phase we're in, 1 through 8. And in this case, you can see we are in a fairly weakened MJO, so it's not really doing a whole lot. So that's kind of why I wouldn't be putting a lot of your banking on just the MJO. We have such anomalous activity and anomalous conditions out there in the tropics that, truthfully, I don't know if the MJO is really going to be the end-all, be-all, or more of just a supplement for tropical activity. Now, here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to show you guys the last couple of runs of our extended range GFS. The GFS goes out 800 plus hours. If you wait for beyond, I guess you could say, if we have, for example, the 18Z for today just came in, as the 0Z is populating for tonight into tomorrow, your latter half of the 0Z is going to start to populate, and we can see even further in time. So this is going to be from July 7th, and as you can see, for a large majority of July, we are quiet. Very quiet. But what I'm already starting to pick up on is if you watch in this particular area, if I can have my pen back, there we go. If you watch in this particular area where we've kind of been talking for a long time now, if you've been following this channel, if you watch right in through there as we go beyond July 25th and into parts of August, Notice how the GFS starts to really increase activity right in that general quadrant. If you switch over to 8 July, go to the extended range, there's July 25th, July 26th, and then forward, seeing the same thing. Start to really see our members perking up. Some hiking them further towards the west, others hiking them up towards the southeast and the mid-Atlantic. So this whole area, like I've been saying, is going to need to pay close attention. If you come to July 9th, you'll see exactly the same thing. I rewind the clock. We go beyond July 25th, and then open the gates is what they said. You can start to see our little ensemble members perking up, crossing the Greater Antilles, crossing the state of Florida, crossing the southeast, and headed up towards the mid-Atlantic. So obviously these are going to change. We're not looking at individual tracks here. We're looking at the general trend. We're looking at the general trend here. We're looking at our very dominant high pressure. That's not going to go anywhere. We have great neutral areas in the winds. We have a large and giant call out there in the MDR at this point in time as we roll into August. So that's going to help to really increase our rising air, our vertical velocities for the tropical Atlantic. And if you notice, we still have a bit of a western extension to our ridge. But regardless, this entire area here is going to really need to be paying close attention, especially as we go through the month of August. September is when we're going to have a mixed bag of things. I totally, full-heartedly believe that. September and October is going to be like a mixed bag. I really do think August is where we're going to have more cut and dried west and then west-northwest tracks with our systems before the pattern begins to oscillate as we start to approach the fall time frame. If you come over to our EPS winds, this is going to be the Euro ensembles in terms of what our zonal wind anomaly is doing in terms of the trade winds. I don't really want you to pay close attention to the colors. I want you to and I'll explain, but what we're doing here is we're not looking at the wind speeds themselves. We're looking at what the wind speeds are trying to tell us. And this is on the European model, okay? So we're looking at our 850 or 5,000 foot wind flow. This is going to indicate where our trade winds are most dominant. And the reason I bring this up is because the European model does not have an extended range like the GEFS does. But what this would tell me is the fact that our Atlantic meridional mode is firing on all cylinders. We're borrowing that leftover instability and putting it into our tropical main development region. We have our strongest northerly winds just to the south of the poles, well to the north of our mid-latitudes. We have a strong westerly component up through here, which means that even the European model is definitely thinking we're going to have a very, very, very robust area of ridging out there across the Atlantic. What this red anomaly, this red shading here, obviously that does show an increase in winds, but what I'm keying in on as a forecaster and what I'm keying in on as a forecaster and an analyst is that increase in our winds tells me that there's something here and there's something here keeping our pressure gradient very strong, or our geostrophic in this case is what it's called because we're above the surface, we're above that boundary layer. So our geostrophic wind flow is going to be very strong right in through there. And if you look, it drops off as soon as it gets to the Caribbean, which tells me we're open for business anywhere in through this general area. We're going to have a really good westerly component in our, or easterly component, in our winds. Lesser Antilles are going to remain on the front lines. This is July 25th. And then from there, it's open season on wherever these things decide to go, whether they be tropical waves, tropical disturbances, or actual named storms. We'll have to wait and see. If we come over to our 12Z European model and look at the overall bulk shear, you can see that our shear is very quickly going to start to evacuate almost the entirety of the Atlantic as we get towards the tail end of July. So that in of itself is a bad sign if we're trying to stay away from tropical activity. And you can kind of look at what the streamlines are doing here. You can see how our wind shear kind of dissipates up and through here. There's not a whole lot of wind shear up and through here. You can see some strong winds up there. And again, again, using context clues. I'm not just reading the colors to you guys. I'm actually interpreting them as a synoptic analyst and trying to communicate with you guys what they're telling me. Anybody can pull this chart up and say, yep, no wind shear, tropical formation, hyperactive. But what I'm trying to put together here are the context clues and what this psychedelic lava lamp of colors is telling me. This acceleration in our winds up towards the north side of the chart tells me our North Atlantic oscillation is likely going to stay in a positive phase. We're going to have a very tight pressure gradient and a strong jet stream ripping across the northernmost Atlantic to the south of Greenland, to the south of Iceland, pushing towards the UK and parts of Europe. What that also tells me is the reason we have the blue shading here is we're looking at anomalous ridging. There's probably high pressure and anticyclonic ridging that's parked up over the Great Lakes and parked over the Atlantic. And again, if you're picking up what I'm putting down here, what that tells me is this whole area is very susceptible to tropical activity. We're going to have a big old blocker here and a big old blocker there, with our NAO being positively enhanced by our jet stream well to the north. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. And I'm not saying that every single tropical wave that comes off of the Atlantic is going to pummel everybody and, just destroy everything. That's not what we're saying here. We're obviously going to have some storms that manage to time it perfectly and escape up and out and may become an issue for Bermuda, Atlantic Canada, maybe the Northeast, who knows. But the general trend as we go through August particularly is going to probably be something like this, is what I'm thinking. That's truthfully what I'm predicting. And obviously, I know that this blankets the East Coast, but take a look at my margin of error here. Notice how my cone really shrinks as we get up towards the Northeast, and it really expands as we go down towards the Southeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Greater Antilles. This is truly what I'm thinking. That's what my gut is telling, and it's screaming me in the face, and that's what I'm going with for my August outlook, my August prediction. This is going to be the area of greatest concern. And then naturally, obviously, if we do have some southern low-latitude riders, that's going to open up Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana once again. But truthfully, that's going to be where I'm watching. We're going to have to watch out for development out and through here. And then we're going to have to watch for the tracks that try to take it up towards our Greater Antilles, the Bahamas, Florida, and then the Carolinas, obviously. And then Georgia, I'm not forgetting about you too, but obviously you're encompassed in the southeast. You can see the same thing on our long-range GFS. The long-range GFS says exactly the same thing. You can see our red anomalies up here indicating the presence of our jet, stronger NAO out across the northern Atlantic, as the name implies. Lots of erroneous weak winds, weaker upper-level winds, indicating that we're probably going to have anomalous, losing my words again. We're going to have anomalous ridging and high pressure across much of the Atlantic. And our shear is going to definitely relax over the immediate Atlantic MDR into the Eastern Caribbean. Gosh, I got to stop stuttering. What is going on right now? I'm losing it. And if you look out over Africa, this is depicting that our easterly jet that pumps our tropical waves out is going to be alive and well, pushing them out into a very favorable atmosphere at that point. This is the beginning of August now. This is our long-range 800-plus hour GEFS that we're looking at here. So not a good sign, definitely not a good sign. If you look at the overall, if I were to just scroll through, you can kind of more or less see what's going on just by looking at the colors and letting that pattern flash through your mind. You can see the jet in through here, easterly jet through here, and then we're just tracking everything off like this. Everything's going to be nudged further towards the west as opposed to towards the east. And then obviously, last but not least, I just wanted to pull up the long-range precipitable water anomaly to show you that our dust is going to stay out there. If you look, these are dry anomalies. This is not dry air. These are dry anomalies. So one can infer that our African dust is definitely still present if this were an actual relative humidity chart. But since we're looking at anomalies here, that's why the brown shading is much smaller. But you can still infer that our Saharan dust is going to be irking its way across the Atlantic for much of this month until finally you go beyond July 25th, and there you go. Look at how those anomalies start to disappear, and we're left with shades of green, increased moisture, increased activity. And if you look at the general steering current, we have a low pressure over the central United States. We have our ridging out through here. There's your path of least resistance, right through there. So we're going to have to wait and see. We'll definitely have to wait and see. So before anybody out there starts to disagree or debate, everybody needs to be prepared, wherever it is you're watching from. And I highly implore you guys to share this information. Share it like you never have before. Please, I know that it sounds very rhetorical. It sounds very cliche. It sounds very just always, that's what all social media people say. Share, like, comment, subscribe, etc. I really need you guys to get this out there. I really do. And it's a painless thing to do, nudging that like button and hitting that share button to get this out to other folks out there who may need to be watching. Everybody needs to be prepared this hurricane season because of the fact that our steering pattern is more westward biased than it was by far than last year. On top of that, we have more favorable conditions for our peak months. So these stronger systems are going to be given the capabilities to rapidly intensify like Beryl did and hit very densely populated areas. So we need to get this information out. We need to be prepared, and we need to be actively preparing during this hiatus. We may not see anything organized and get named at the end of July, but I really am confident that as we continue these Monday, Wednesday, Friday tropical updates, as we get past July 15th, next Monday, as we get beyond July 15th, we're slowly but surely going to start to see our long-range data perking up. I promise you guys, I'm very confident in that. I don't know why there's some people out there saying it's not going to happen until end of August. That's very far-fetched. I really don't think so. You guys need to reevaluate what it is you're using to forecast. I really do think beyond July 15th, this upcoming week, as a matter of fact, as we go through next week and start looking at our tropical updates here on the channel, I'm willing to guarantee we fast forward, we're going to start to slowly but surely see our signs increasing. The development signals, the probabilities, our little spaghetti plots are slowly but surely going to start to wake up again as they refamiliarize themselves with the favorable environment that we're predicting towards the very tail end of July and especially into August. And just to give you guys a little bit of a background, I did some converting and some percentage to fraction to ratio conversions, and I did some very basic math to more or less come to my own internal conclusions to pass along to you guys. And I did some background research. I looked at a couple of different El Nino seasons. 2015 was one that I immediately started with. We had a total of 11 named storms, very boring hurricane season. 2 of those storms made a United States landfall. 9 of them went all out to sea. So we had a 2/11, 9/11 fractional ratio. You break that down to a 2/9 ratio and you simplify it. For every 1 landfall, you have 5 to 6 out-to-sea storms. That's a pretty big difference. So if you get hit by a storm, especially in a boring season, El Nino typically does not produce a ton of named storms. I know 2023 was a misnomer, obviously, guys, but hear me out. And even then, I'll show you the ratios still line up. The ratios still work. So mathematically speaking, not scientifically, if you do the ratios and you do the calculations and the simple conversions, the math actually lines up to support that we're not just hyping here. We're making sense mathematically. So for the 2015 strong El Nino hurricane season, 2 made landfall, 9 went out to sea. You're left with a 1 in 5 shot of being impacted by a storm. With a total of 11 storms, you're looking at a 10 to 15% chance, maybe bumping that up to a 20% chance across the board that you're going to get hit by something. I decided to do the calculation for 2023 because we had almost double the amount of named storms. We had 20 named storms, 3 made landfall, 17 were fish storms. So you break that down, you start off with your common denominator fractions, 3/20, 17/20. You can eliminate the common denominator because it's the same, so you're left with a 3/17 split. You simplify that, you're still left with the same ratio of 1 out of 5 or 6 shot. So even if we had a very robust El Nino season, we had the exact same statistics mathematically as a very boring, lackluster El Nino season. Then you do the math for a non-El Nino season. We look at 2005, for example, as one of our more primary analogs for this year. We had 31 named storms, 12 of which made landfall. 19 did not make landfall. So we're left with a 12 and 19 split. You begin to simplify that using common multiples for simplifying 12 and 19, and you come down to a 6 at a 9.5 ratio. You simplify that a little bit further using a decimal, and you're looking at a 2 out of 3 chance. Big difference. So for every 2 impacts, you're looking at 3 out to sea. But granted, that ratio for every 2 to 3, a 2/3 ratio, is a lot bigger than a 1 to 5 ratio. And my conclusion here was El Nino years average a 1 out of 5 shot at landfall, while neutral to La Nina years average a 2/3 ratio or 2 out of 3 ratio. So, and I'm willing to bet if I were to just go through hurricane seasons and rack and stack hurricane seasons, I'm willing to bet if we go through those basic calculations mathematically and you break that down into the simplest form that ratio can go, you're probably going to see a trend of 1 in 5, 1 in 6 shot for our El Nino years, 2 and 3, 2 and 4 maybe on our La Nina neutral seasons. So it's in the math. If you don't believe the science, if you don't believe the computer models, I'm taking hard black and white math and breaking it down for you guys. That was part of the homework I was doing a lot of the day yesterday in between work and just studying other tropical material alongside my school material. I did a couple of other hurricane seasons, and there was a consistent trend, a mode to continue with the math terminology. The median for each season was 1 in 5 for El Nino, 2 and 3 for La Nina. You notice how the ratio shrinks up very much so in a La Nina or a cool neutral or an Enzo neutral pattern. And the mode was for every El Nino season, it was usually a 1 in 5, 1 in 6 shot, like about a 15-20% chance you're going to get hit by something. And then in a matter of fact, consistently with our La Nina years, the analogs specifically that CSU had generated, the analogs I used were the 1886, 1926, 1933, and so on and so forth. You do the calculations, you simplify your fractions, and you turn them into ratios, you're consistently seeing that 2 out of 3 or 2-3 ratio for landfalls, impacts. So naturally, if you don't want to look at the science, if you don't want to trust the forecasts, you don't want to look at the data, look at the math. Math has always been my struggle. Why? Because math is black and white. Math you can put in a box. Weather you can't put in a box. Weather is all this. You kind of have to have a level of imagination when looking at forecasts and analyzing the weather. Math, on the other hand, I struggled with because there's only one, it's an end-all be-all. If you dork something up in your equation or your formula, you're wrong every single time. At least in a forecast, you can adjust, you can adapt, you can be resilient, you can show resiliency, course correct, and so on and so forth. I have always struggled with math because if you mess one piece up, everything's busted. And so looking at a black and white breakdown mathematically, this season is destined to be a bit more impactful than, for example, the hype season of last year. So definitely get this information out, guys. My August outlook is not looking too good, and I have a feeling we're going to have 1, if not 2 big storms coming at us for the month of August. We might not see anything big organizing the end of this month. We're probably going to just be seeing our signals coming back as we get towards the last 5 or 6 days. We'll probably have a more obvious signal as we get towards the last full week of this month, from the 22nd, I think I can see on my calendar, to the 27th. But yeah, August, and especially into the back end of August, September, and October, as we're riding up to the top of the peak of the hurricane season, it's going to get busy, and we're going to be working overtime. That's why I'm literally over here not only researching, but literally doing math for you guys to make sure that my predictions are backed up by hard black and white numbers as opposed to gray area. Because I know everybody out there can say, oh, but you're looking at the models and you're hyping up a signal, it's probably going to be gone. It's like, well, I'm crunching numbers too to compare and and contrast. So you can't argue with the numbers. You can argue with the forecasts because they obviously change, but you can't argue with black and white numbers. And the ratio is glaring in your face. Naturally, we're looking at a very impactful season as a neutral or a La Nina. And the problem with that is, which adds to the impactfulness, is our latest CSU and tropical storm risk, or TSR. They're predicting another 22 named storms. So if you do the math and you factor in and you multiply the ratio that we've found for our Enzo neutral and La Nina seasons, and you factor that into a potential 22 to 25 named storm hurricane season, we can probably break down that at least 6, if not 7 of them are going to impact somebody, which is far more impactful than last year. Remember, in 2005, for example, one of our big analogs, especially after Beryl pulled in Emily and Dennis, 12 of those made landfall. And if we're looking at 25 named storms, and you kind of factor in the ratios that we've consistently calculated here, you can more or less guesstimate that 6 to 7 more storms are likely to hit somebody. So that's all she wrote, guys. We're going to go ahead and close out the live stream now. I got to go get some dinner in my system, but it's been a pleasure talking with everybody. It felt weird not doing a live stream yesterday, so it's great to see everybody tonight. Everybody I can see in the chat, Super Charas, Jacob, Twilight Firefly, 100, Mick and Marley, Greg D, good to see you for sure, Judy Tokos, Kanoy Brown, Daddy Shark PM, I saw you in there as well. So yeah, we definitely have a lot of ground to make up for sure. And I honestly, at least for the rest of this month and through August, I have my own runner-up analogs being 2004 and 2017. So I know that CSU has our La Nina analogs out there, but we are in a neutral pattern right now. So I'm going to give the runner-up trophies to 2004 and 2017, and I'm going to do some more research behind the scenes before I see you guys again for other neutral weak La Nina seasons, looking through our historical data so I can come with some more internal Weather Center analogs that we can use to kind of extrapolate what we're going to be seeing in August. My mom was in Hurricane Hazel. That brings back memories. Jacob Waddell, big love to you as well, sir. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate all you guys' generous and continuous support. We're going to be back to a slower tempo. This way I can mentally recoup and also continue my research in the background so we have more to talk about each upcoming live stream, as opposed to just simply saying, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, So we'll see you again Friday. We'll probably see you Friday morning, just to tell you the truth. Today I had to go get a haircut, start getting ready to look the military part for the weekend, so that's why we did it in the evening. But Friday, anticipate a live stream first thing in the morning, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and we'll talk to you guys again very soon. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them in the comment section and below of this live stream upon its conclusion. Please consider hitting subscribe if you haven't already done so. If you're all returning subscribers, thank you very much for tuning in and spending some of your evening with us here in the Weather Center, and we'll talk to you again very soon. But until next time, guys, it's been a pleasure. This is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.